That's not a big deal. Excellent. And so we just hit recorded, so now we're live. All right. So welcome, everyone. Thank you guys for joining me today. I know that life is busy, so we appreciate your time. We're going to try to keep this brief here today on our Discovery webinar. We're going to talk about caregiver recruitment. All right. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Brandon Clifford. I'm the Senior Vice President here at HomeWell, head of franchise development, part of the executive leadership team. So have a kind of wear a lot of different hats. But I get really excited about working with people at this point in the process where they're new to this opportunity, they're interested in business ownership, and are trying to put the pieces of the puzzle in place to decide if this is the right fit for you. So I know that a major question for a lot of people in this business and when they're evaluating it is, how am I going to staff it? How am I going to find caregivers? And so hopefully today we'll at least kind of start to put that piece of the puzzle together for you and let you know that we do have a pretty solid plan that you can plug into, and kind of focus on that engine. We talk a lot about how there's two engines that are going to drive your business. There's a sales engine, someone who's out in the field, marketing your business, generating interest, generating leads for HomeWell, building the brand in your local market. And then there's the recruitment engine, someone who's, focused on recruiting caregivers, and bringing in, caregivers to your organization so you can staff the shifts. So we're going to cover that a little bit today. Let's hop right in. But like I said, when we were waiting to get started, feel free, if you have a question, raise your hand, type it into the chat. Samantha's here to kind of keep an eye on that chat if I miss it. But otherwise, I'm happy to pivot and go down any path you guys want to take. So, but to get started, when you talk about like, how are you going to staff all these shifts? How are you going to take care of your clients in your local market? It's very common in this business, where people look at, the staffing piece, the caregiver piece, as an expense, right? And that's pretty common because on your P&L, it's going to show up that way, right? What we try to preach here at HomeWell and what we teach our owners to do is really, focus on caregivers as actually an asset. So it's a little bit of a mind shift, and it sounds simple, but when done properly, it really takes your recruitment efforts to the next level. So instead of thinking, I have to find someone to fill a shift, we try to portray the caregivers as they're your lifeblood. They're actually a revenue driving source. You kind of reverse engineer it, and by looking at it through that lens, it gets your HR manager, it gets you excited about wanting to go out and find more caregivers because that's going to lead to more business, right? And so it helps you to kind of put changing that mentality allows you to build that culture in your office, which is going to if you can make your caregivers happier, that's going to make your clients happier, right? That's going to make recruitment efforts more efficient by just having the right focus of what a caregiver really means for your company. And so that's how I wanted to frame the conversation today. Because ultimately, when people really think about what is the cost or what is the expense to a caregiver, it kind of taints your vision from the start. We like to look at what's the value, right? What can a caregiver bring to your organization if you have one? And this is some numbers based on the Home Care Pulse benchmarking study from 2022 here, which is a great resource if you guys are serious about the home care space and you want to evaluate some benchmarking. I'd encourage you to go out there and get it. And if you look at home care agencies, there's about 900 that participated in this survey that finished in the top 95th percentile in terms of revenue. Their revenue per caregiver was $54,000 a year, right? So think about that for a minute. If from the beginning you think to yourself, hey, if I can go find one caregiver, that's going to bring $54,000 in revenue to my company. What's your company look like if you could find 10 caregivers? If you can find 100 caregivers, right? And that's how you really, it gets exciting for you, and you can kind of change the mindset of where a lot of people could label it as churn, or turnover to, hey, I'm growing my company. And even if you look down to like the 25th percentile, so smaller agencies, that maybe do have higher turnover, even that's about $10,000 is the value on paper of a caregiver, right? So what would that look like if you're able to just go out and get 10 more caregivers, right? That's going to bring an extra $100,000 in revenue into your business, right? And so that's the mentality we like to lead with when it comes to recruiting. So that way you really see your caregivers as a valuable asset to your company, not an expense line item on the books, right? So how do we help with that, right? What does that look like, right? What we have here at HomeWell, obviously, you guys have probably done a little bit of due diligence, and you've seen we have a series of signature programs that are on the client side that our owners can plug into to help them provide, a little bit of a differentiator in their local market in terms of how we take care of seniors and help them live longer, healthier lives at home. So on the recruitment side, we have a program as well called the Talent Management Program that really dives into and teaches your people how to go out and recruit the right way from day one, right? And it starts by taking a peek under the hood and trying to, create personas, understanding who your ideal caregiver is, right? What are they going to look like? What's their background? What's their skill set? Where do they live? All those little things kind of create these personas. So then you can clearly articulate to your recruiter or to your HR manager, hey, this is who we're looking for in a caregiver. And then they can go out and find them, to drive revenue at your local agency. To kind of give you a little bit of a snapshot, again, this is from the Home Care Pulse benchmarking study of who caregivers typically are. These are some stats that are out there, and over 90% of them are female. There's about 22% of them are going to be a single parent. Many of them are low to medium wage type employees. And one stat I wanted to highlight on here is that 81% of them are currently employed. And I think that's important to understand because you're competing, right? You're competing for caregivers. And again, that kind of goes back to a mindset shift where instead of thinking about like, hey, I have to staff this shift, your caregivers are sort of like your customers, right? And that's what we want our owners to really focus on, is that without the caregiver, I can't take care of the client. So I have to take care of my caregivers, in a special way that's going to make me become the employer of choice in my local market. So then that way, when referral sources are sending clients my way, I can staff the shift. And it sounds simple, but it really sets yourself apart. So if that's the mentality you're going to take, you have to really treat recruitment like it's just like a sales pipeline, right? And, to kind of take away the culture part of it and just look at it from a number standpoint. This is what a typical pipeline would look like for an office and, the 1.5 to $3 million range, a typical home care agency out there. You have to follow the funnel, right? And we try to take a data-driven approach to caregiver recruitment. So you're making sure you're holding your team accountable to hitting goals for a certain amount of applications coming in every single week. Because if we bring in this many every single week in applications, we're going to be able to have this many interviews. And if we have this many interviews, we're going to be able to hire this many caregivers, which means now my sales rep can go speak with confidence when he goes out to referral sources and can say, yes, I can staff those shifts, send them my way, because the other engine is running full steam. All right. And so where are they coming from, right? Top 10 recruitment sources in 2021. We could dive into each one of these and probably spend a whole half-hour conversation on each one and how we help with it and the strategy behind it. But one I wanted to highlight here is actually this light blue one on the bottom, 13.4%, and the top gray one, 6.6%. Because what that is actually employees and employees, right? A little bit different, but referred from your current caregivers and from old caregivers that come back and work for you again. And so that's almost 20% of your caregivers are going to come from your current caregivers. What does that mean? All right. What it means is it's a community, right? And the caregiving community, it's a big world, but it's very, very small as well. So your reputation is going to be really important. And ultimately what we love to hear is when a caregiver tells our franchisee in the local market that HomeWell's just different, because that means you've done the right thing and you've taken care of the caregiver, and they're going to go tell their friends, right? They're going to bring more caregivers into your business, and who doesn't like a good referral, right? So that's where you really separate yourself. Sure, you're going to definitely have a lot of caregivers come to you online through Indeed and and through social media, your website, all those different places. But if you can cultivate a community of caregivers to where they're telling their friends, hey, you need to come work for HomeWell, that's the win, right? That's where we want to get you to. So then ultimately, like I said, if your caregivers are your customers, right? Ultimately, because that's really what they are, you need to have a process. And that's also going to be, a good customer experience, right? Caregiver experience, onboarding experience, right? You need to be buttoned up. So that way, if they're coming in for an interview, your goal is to get them working as fast as possible. Because remember, 81% of them are already working somewhere else, right? So if you can't staff them, if you can't give them the shifts that they desire, chances are they're going to go find work elsewhere, right? So we try to button up this process, and again, it's all part of that, the talent, the brand program that we have that you can plug right into, to where you're going to be constantly trying to hit that number of applications every single week. You'll have a scheduler or an HR manager who's calling applicants as quickly as possible and doing a little bit of a pre-screening and trying to book them to come in for an interview. And whether it's you or your care manager or your HR manager, depending on what spot you are in your business, you're going to schedule those interviews for probably like a Thursday, right? They'll come in on Thursday, you'll interview 8, 10, 15 caregivers, whatever your goals are in your current office, right? And you're going to hire a certain percentage of them. Say you hire 10 caregivers and they're all going to come in to start on Monday, right? On Monday, they'll come in. That's when they'll do their new hire paperwork. They'll have their orientation, and meanwhile, they're not fully hired just yet because they have to do a little bit of pre-training. You're going to do background checks. That takes some time, but what it's doing is it's sort of buying you a little bit of time, while your sales rep is out cultivating leads of seniors to get them out on a shift. And your goal is to, from when they get hired on that Monday, to have them working their first shift within 7 days, right? And the offices that are able to keep those two engines churning the fastest are the ones that are able to grow the quickest. So, but have no fear. I know this is a lot. It opens up a can of worms for sure, and can seem a little bit overwhelming, but we have the talent management program for you to plug right into and follow, and have your franchise business coach help you manage those key KPIs to make sure that you're on the right track with that kind of a balancing act the first 60, 90 days. So the 4 pillars in our talent management program is attract and recruit, orient and train, mentor and supervise, engage and retain, right? And that 4th one is one that we didn't get into at all today, because that's a whole separate conversation. Because obviously it's one thing to bring your caregivers in, it's a totally separate conversation about how to keep them, right? But if you lead with it with the right mentality from the beginning, that these caregivers are an asset, not an expense, you're going to treat them the right way from the beginning. And that's what's going to separate you from other agencies in your local market. So like I said, this is going to be fast. My goal was to try to keep it to 15 minutes. I'm going to be slightly over, but hopefully what I want you to take away from this conversation today, if there's one thing you can take away, is that recruiting caregivers, it's not really difficult. There's a large pool out there, right? But what it does take is consistency. Okay. It's not rocket science, but it's consistency. Having consistent focus on placing your ads, calling your applicants swiftly, speed to lead, quote unquote, just like a sales funnel, right? Bringing them in and having that smooth orientation process where they feel respected, and you lead with them as a valuable asset, and that's going to make you successful in recruitment. So that being said, I was going to open it up now and see if there's any questions. We can unmute people. You can feel free to turn on your cameras. I'm happy to take this conversation wherever you guys want to go. So Sam, did any questions come in during that call?
No, there's not an option for raising hands.
Oh, no chats. Okay, so anybody want to unmute and share something? Any questions, feedback? I think I saw Michael unmute. Michael, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I have 3 questions actually. So I know we did talk about retaining the caregivers, but historically, what's been like the average turnover rate for caregivers?
Yeah, and so we're actually going to do a webinar on this in a couple of weeks.
Okay.
So yeah, caregiver turnover in the home care space is definitely something that's always been around. And over the last 5 years, based on that home care pulse benchmarking study, it's hovered right around 60%, turnover. What we find and what we hear from our franchisees is that it's not like that turnover rate isn't necessarily because caregivers are flaky or whatnot, right? A lot of times caregivers get a bad rep. It's because it's like a transient type workforce, okay, where oftentimes a caregiver is going to work for you and then they're going to move on to bigger and better things, and that's totally fine. And that's why consistency is the key. It's always going to be like the 80-20 rule, right? Where 20% of your caregiver base will do 80% of the work, and they'll be your long-term, the ones that stick with you the longest. And we have a career ladder. We have, ways that they can get certified and get, move up and get raises and work with more, complicated clients so that they can earn more money to try to retain them. But ultimately, you're going to have some caregivers, a large majority of them, that are going to be probably in the bucket of, younger, going to nursing school, maybe to become a CNA or something, right? So if they're a college student and they're working for you today, and then they get a degree as a nurse and they go on to work for a hospital, and that's counted as a turnover, but you're happy for them because they now are an RN, right? Now out of that pool, you might get a future care manager too, who will stick with you forever, right? And then you'll have another pool of caregivers that might be, age 55, like the empty nesters, whose kids are grown up and moved on, and they might stick with you for a really long time, so you're going to have a little bit of a mixed, bag, so to speak, when it comes to your caregiver population, but it's not because they're flaky. It's more because they're transient, in my opinion.
Yep, that makes sense. A few more here. So is there a requirement for how many hours a caregiver should work to remain on your books per year?
That's an awesome question, and I think that's one that you probably want to talk to our owners about. I would defer to them for how they handle that in their local market. So we do have, you can have in your WellSky ClearCare platform, which is our operating system, active versus inactive caregivers, right? And that's sort of like always the secret sauce to recruitment and retention is matching up what the caregiver wants and what you need, right? And it's easier said than done. But I think you're kind of going down a great path to figuring out what's going to be, because at the beginning you're going to just want to hire everyone, right? But as you get more selective, right, then you can have those sorts of things like, hey, I need people that can work 20 hours a week minimum, so again, like it's different day one versus year 4, right? You kind of evolve. So I think that the best, talking to some of our owners on how they handle that when they first started to where they are today, because again, like day one, you're just looking to build the caregiver base, right? So you don't want to necessarily turn people away, but as you mature and you need to make sure that you have a solid foundation, but it kind of comes back to, it will be like an 80-20 rule where you're always going to have people that are kind of coming in and out, and you don't want to necessarily turn people away if they can only work 12 hours a week, because maybe they'd be a perfect, person to work as an on-call caregiver for you or something, right? So,
and so along those lines, what do you reckon? What's like the ideal ratio of caregivers to clients? Like 2 to 1? Like, what do you reckon?
That's an awesome question. So yeah, we train for 2 to 1 is your goal, right? But that's on your bench. Now working, you'll probably be 1 to 1.5, in that range, caregiver to client ratio, because, you're going to have, like, say you have 20 clients, right? You might only have 25 caregivers that are working those 20 clients based on the hours that they need, right? Because maybe on average, they're 30 hours a week or 35 hours a week, the clients, right? So you don't need 2 caregivers to cover that one client if it's only 35 hours a week. But what you want to do is have a bench of caregivers so that tomorrow, if you get a referral for a 24/7 client, that's going to take 5 caregivers, right? So you want to make sure you have a deep bench. And so that's why we try to shoot for 2 to 1 on your roster. Does that make sense?
Yep, makes sense. And I have one more question. Sorry to everyone.
Mhm.
What's the process look like to assess how good the caregivers are? Like after an interaction, do you ask the client, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are the caregivers, blah, blah, blah? How does that work?
Yeah. So we actually have a partnership with Home Care Pulse, where they do third-party surveys, right? It's kind of like a Listen 360 type platform. And it's, it's our expense as a franchisor. It doesn't cost you anything. You just opt into it and say, yes, you can call my clients, basically, which you have to do, right? But it doesn't cost you anything. And that way we can measure that, Michael. What is the client satisfaction? We also do it they're going to call your caregivers too, for caregiver satisfaction, because that's equally important. And what that does is it's going to generate reviews, so that you can, you can market those if you're getting all 5-star reviews, right? So yeah, we have it's like Listen 360 is one that people have all heard of. Most people have heard of in terms of like consumer happiness, right? And it's a similar product to that, through a vendor partnership that we have, that's done for you. You have a dashboard where you can log into as the owner and see like what are the reviews of this particular caregiver, what are the reviews, of this client, so that way because it's often, sometimes, a client might complain, but it's not really the caregiver. You got to remember, we're dealing with 85 plus, 65 plus, what I mean? Sometimes there's things that aren't necessarily the true part of the story. So you want to make sure if you do get a complaint from a client, you don't overreact, because your caregiver is, I mean, they're your employee, right? And I mentioned on this conversation, they're kind of like your customer. But you notice trends, of course, right? So you don't want to just automatically assume that it's the caregiver's fault, because sometimes it's the client too, right?
Makes sense. Thank you.
I think I saw Cisco on mute there. Cisco, do you have a question?
Yes, sir. My question is background checks. How do you do the background check? I saw in the placement of the selection process that is after you've hired the caregivers, and when you do the background checks. I was just wondering how you go about it, and is there like a liability gauge or risk on the caregivers? Like that's the question that I get a lot of times. People say, oh, but it's risky because you hire somebody and then they can hurt somebody, or they do something wrong and it's on you. So is there a risk, I guess, gauge or liability, I guess the level of risk per caregiver? Maybe there's a stat already on that.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a great question as well, that I think that maybe you want to write down and ask owners as well, and how they've handled their local market, because we have not seen a lot of issues arise from that. Now, you definitely want to do your background checks. It's something that we have. Every state's a little bit different in terms of how deep you need to go with background checks, but standard drug screening, of course, sex offender check, do they have any felonies and whatnot, and that's why there's that like buffer between orientation and when they go out on a shift, right? You can't place them in a home until their background check comes back clean. And remember, even though you might hire them, you're not paying them until they take a shift. Okay. And while you have to pay for training, typically the contract, the employment contract says that you don't get that pay for training until you've completed your first week of work in the field, so you're able to kind of like buffer yourself a little bit for if a background check comes back with a felony or something like that on it, you can cut bait and move on, right? Now, in terms of your liability, everyone's going to have a $2 million general liability insurance to cover things if something does happen. And I would not say that nothing ever will happen. I just think that maybe if that's a concern, ask some owners. You've been open for 5 years? Have you ever had, have you ever been sued because a caregiver hurt a client or stole from a client or something, right? And because we haven't seen a lot, and as long as you're doing your due diligence and you are doing your background checks and protecting yourself, you should be good in that regards.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Great questions, guys. So Cisco, where are you from?
I'm in Houston.
Awesome. What about you, Michael? Where are you from?
I'm in the Vegas area.
Vegas. Fantastic. And I see Io's on here. He's down in Austin, and Anika, I know you're down in the Fort Lauderdale, Miami area. And then Phoebe, where are you from? Can you hear? Are you able to unmute? If not, it's okay.
I'm actually from Chicago.
Awesome. Cool. Nice. So we got a good swath of the country covered today. The modern Zoom shrinks the world, right? Cool. All right. Well, are there any other questions? I know we had 30 minutes. We're at 27 minutes right now. So I like to stay on time. I want to be respectful. I know you guys are all busy people. And like I said at the beginning of this, most importantly, I appreciate your time and taking time to be here on a Friday. That means a lot to us. So please stick with your franchise development directors, whether you're working with Christina or Dan or John or whoever, or Sam, and they'll reach out to you with next steps. And yeah, if you have more questions about caregiver recruitment, the best people to answer them are our owners. So I encourage you to pick up the phone, call some owners. Sam can help coordinate some of those calls for you if you need them. And yeah, I mean, I'm hoping to talk to you guys all individually soon. All right. Any other questions? Cisco, did you have another question? Or you're just saying thank you?
No, I will say thank you, but yeah, I've been just looking at HomeWell and yeah, I guess my question would be, how do you guys rank among the this is nothing to do with the recruitment, but how HomeWell ranks, with the other competitors?
Just specifically on like caregiver recruitment,
Yes.
you mean?
No, as a business.
So every market, of course, is different on like, where it ranks and what, I mean, in terms of like a ranking, I think we're the best, and I'm not sure exactly what,
Well, market
depends
share,
on what metric you're looking for, I guess, right?
maybe like a market share.
Sure.
Or
Yeah. I
no.
mean, we're definitely not the biggest. We have over 100 territories open right now. It's like 60 or so unique agencies across the country, 62, 63, something like that. So we do have some, pretty good market share down there in Houston. We have 2 offices open, one in the Sugar Land area, and then one up in Cypress. So there's definitely some name recognition already down there. And I mean, I guess for your particular market, that's the thing about home care. And franchising in general, we really believe that it's a very hyper local business, and sure, national footprint helps for like brand partnerships and vendor relations, and that's a lot of what we do to bring to the table to help save our owners money and drive revenue. But also in your local market, your clients and your caregivers are going to want to know the owners, right? So yeah, I would defer to, we can let you talk to Vaishali, who's over there in Sugar Land, or talk to Dallas and Alyssa up there in Cypress, and kind of do a deep dive into your market, and see, and you can, kind of evaluate that for yourself,
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for your time. I hope you guys all have a wonderful weekend. Any fathers on here, have a wonderful Father's Day, or don't forget to wish your dad a happy Father's Day, and you guys have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.